Hello friends, my name is Jess and welcome back to my channel, Books Past Bedtime. In today's video, we're going to be talking about my best books of 2024. They are loosely ranked in order of how much I liked them, so make sure to stick around to the end of the video to find out my absolute favorite of the year. If you can guess, like yesterday, I'll give you a cookie. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. The first book I want to talk about is Satisfaction Guaranteed by Carolina Stets Waters. This is a sapphic contemporary rom-com following our main characters Cade and Selena. Now, in the beginning of this book, Cade inherits a sex toy shop from her late aunt. Cade is a very buttoned up, serious businesswoman. She's not really sure what to do with the sex toy shop. So she travels to Portland to figure out if it's a viable business, if she wants to sell it, what she wants to do. When she gets there, she meets Selena, who it turns out is a co-owner of this shop along with Cade. She worked at the shop, was a good friend of Cade's aunt, and Cade's aunt decided to leave her half the store as well. And so they kind of butt heads on what they want to do with the shop. Selena obviously wants to keep it. Cade is thinking about selling it. They're not sure how they're going to overcome their differences, meet in the middle, decide what to do with this business. But as the two spend more time together, they start to see more eye to eye, and they also realize that though they are opposites on paper, they really make a lot of sense together, and the chemistry between them starts to build and they have a romance, and it's very cute. I loved this book. This was probably my most surprising read of the year because I went into it expecting a 3-star read, an okay book, but I found a new favorite and it was so good. I loved it so much. I just thought the romance between Cade and Selena was so beautiful and natural. I really enjoyed watching them get to know each other and grow as people together, and it was the kind of romance where they didn't have to change for each other even though they're very much opposites. They both met each other where they were at, grew together instead of changing, they complemented each other in perfect ways, kind of taught each other the best of their traits and helped each other loosen up or be more ambitious. They just came together perfectly. Even though they were opposites, they were puzzle pieces that needed each other to connect, and it was just such a beautiful romance, and I really loved seeing that and reading about that. I also really loved the aspects of this story that dealt with grief, as they both have lost this important person in their life. The way that they could support each other and be there for each other in grief, I thought was really beautiful and really well done. I liked how that was done. And also just the campiness factor of inheriting a sex toy shop is just so ridiculous and so funny that it just made for some really great moments, and I really enjoyed it and thought it was so much fun. Now, I know I've talked a lot about the Green Creek series on this channel this year, and that's just because I loved it so much, but I do want to include my favorite book from that series in this video, and that is definitely Ravensong. Ravensong is book number 2, and it's Gordo's book, and Gordo honestly is probably my favorite character of the year. I love Gordo so much. If you haven't heard the spiel already, this book in particular is about Gordo, and the series as a whole is about the Bennett werewolf pack. Gordo grew up to be, was raised to be the witch for the werewolf pack. The Bennett pack really betrayed Gordo. They left him behind. They abandoned him after his father abandoned him, and so Gordo has really been on his own forever, and he's vowed never to, speak with the wolves again because they just really fucked him up. I don't blame him. I would not have forgiven them if I was Gordo. This was all well and good when the Bennett pack was far away, but now they've moved back into town along with Mark Bennett, who Gordo was in love with back in the day. He inadvertently gets pulled back into their orbit, pulled back into this shared history with Mark and with the pack, and he kind of has to figure out if having this family is worth forgiving them for their betrayal, And it's just really such a powerful story, and I just wanted to jump into the book and stand up for Gordo so bad. I wanted to protect him with my life. I would take a bullet for that man. I love him so much, and I was just so angry about the injustice of the way he was treated, and I just wanted to pummel some sense into the people around him. I was like, don't you see that Gordo is the best person in your life? Please take care of him. Please stop treating him like shit, or I will kill you. I will murder you. I loved this book, I think, just because I had such an innate connection with Gordo, and I really loved seeing his relationship with Mark. Even though I wanted to beat the shit out of Mark, I was happy in the end because Gordo was happy, And I loved seeing Gordo's relationship with Ox and with the rest of the pack grow. His relationship with Robbie, who's the new werewolf in town, was so funny. And Gordo's just such my perfect character. He's so gruff and hard on the outside because life has beat the shit out of him, but he's so soft and sweet on the inside, and he will do anything for the people he loves, and I just love him so much as a character. Love him so much. And the plot in this book is really good as well. Everything's really like ramping up. There's this like huge battle scene that's crazy, and yeah, I don't know, I just loved this one so much. This is definitely my favorite in this series, and it belonged in this video. I loved it so much, and I love Gordo. He's my son. Next, I want to talk about This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El-Motar. This is a sapphic sci-fi story, and it's about two time-traveling agents from warring futures who begin to exchange letters across time. At first, the letters kind of start as like taunting, like haha you can't catch me situation, as they are directly competing, directly at war with one another. But as they continue to exchange letters, they develop this camaraderie that turns into a friendship, that turns into a romance across time, across space, and it's so beautiful. It's so lovely. But of course, they're on opposite sides of the war. They can never be together. If they are, it could create insane consequences, not only for them, but also for the world at large. So this story really blew me away. I went into it not really sure what to expect. I'd heard lots of different things. I've heard people love it. I've heard people can't read it because it's so confusing. I'm like, I'm not really sure what I'm getting myself into, but I loved it. It was so good. The prose is really sparse, and it is kind of a complicated world, so I think that's where some of the confusion lies, but I really didn't find it super hard to follow. Would recommend the physical over the audio. But that being said, I did think it was fairly digestible, and I loved it. I just thought it was so good. It really was like one of the most beautiful, emotional, profound romances that I've read this year. I think about it a lot. It's just so powerful to me that these like really complicated emotions and feelings can be conveyed in sparse prose like this, and this like complicated friggin' sci-fi world too could be communicated in these sparse words. I just think it's so beautiful and really speaks to the talent of the authors, and I really want to read more from these two authors. I don't think they've like written a ton though, which is the problem. But I really loved this book. I thought it was so beautiful and definitely one of my favorites of the year. Another book in a series that I want to give a mention to is Power Unbound by Frame Marks. This is the third book in the Last Biting trilogy, and I love this one. I think it was my favorite in the series. It was my first book of 2024, and I'm so glad it was my first book of 2024 because I really wanted my first book of 2024 to be a 5-star book, and this was indeed a 5-star book, so I picked well, and I'm glad I picked this one because it was really, really good. This book, we're following our main character Jack, aka Lord Hawthorne. Lord Hawthorne a long time ago swore off magic, but he's kind of been pulled back into the fray of magic because of his associations with the characters in the previous books and their quest to stop these 3 magical artifacts from falling into the wrong hands, because whoever has these 3 magical artifacts can control all of the magic in the world at one time and steal it from everyone. They don't want this to happen. They're trying to prevent it. 2 of the artifacts have been found and have been stolen by the bad guys, and so there's one left. They have to find it before the other people do. Meanwhile, there's an enemies to lovers romance going on between Lord Hawthorne and this man named Alan, who we meet in the second book. He's like a reporter, but also like a con man, up to no good, basically. But he's like on their side, sort of. Him and Lord Hawthorne have this combative relationship, but they have a lot of chemistry, and it turns into a spark of, you know, attraction and hooking up and falling in love. I loved this book. I thought it was such a good balance between like an explosive romance and a really interesting plot. It is the culmination of everything that's been happening throughout this book, and I really thought all of the fantasy elements were really tied up. I liked how the plot progressed and how everything ended up on that side of things. And I also do think the romance between Lord Hawthorne and Alan was my favorite in the series. I just really loved their chemistry. I thought it was amazing. I liked the spice in this book. I thought it was really good. I don't know, I loved this one too. I thought it was so good. And I loved seeing all the other characters make cameos. It was really just a great ending to a fantastic series, and I really loved it so much. Another honestly pretty big surprise addition to this list is Big Gay Wedding by Byron Lane. I don't think I've talked about this book a ton on my channel, mostly because I don't really know how to categorize it as far as like a recommendation goes, but I really loved it. It was one of my favorites of the year by far. Just like contemporary fiction. It's not really a romance. It's not really literary. I mean, I guess it's probably more lit fic than anything, but I would just say it's contemporary fiction. I don't know, but I loved this book. I listened to it on audio in a single day on a drive home, and I freaking loved it. In it, we're following our main character, Barnett, and Barnett has a secret. His secret is not that he's gay, because his mother has known this for a really long time, but it is a secret that he is getting married, and he's planning to do this on his mother's farm in in rural Louisiana. Once he reveals the secret to his mother is like not super happy about this. She doesn't know what the rest of the town will think, what people will say. She's worried about her standing like in the church and in the town. She has always kind of been don't ask, don't tell with Barnett, and so this is really like a shock to her system, and Barnett knows it was going to be a shock to her system, which is why he didn't really share it. He, I think, had tried to talk to his mother about his partner before and just been kind of shut down or like been too afraid to talk to his mother about her. I can't really remember. But throughout the course of this story, Barnett's mother like learns about unconditional love and how to show that to her son and what that truly means to have a gay son, and she kind of has this moral dilemma about it. But this was just such like a hopeful, lovely, wonderful story about overcoming prejudice and feelings and just like family coming together, mother and son coming together, parent and child coming together, understanding one another, like working through their issues, creating this like unbreakable bond. And it was just such a beautiful, emotional read. It was a little bit hard to get into at first just because it's written in like a third-person omniscient narrative, and I think I just read so much romance and I'm not used to that kind of perspective when I'm reading. So that took a little bit to get used to, but once I got into it, I do think the audio probably helped with that. I just did not want to stop reading this book. It was so compulsively readable. I had to know what was going to happen. I had to know how these characters' lives are going to end up, and it was just such a good book. It was just such a good book. Like, this is a book that I can recommend to pretty much anyone because I think a lot of people would get things out of it. It's so different from everything else that I read, but I so appreciated the queer rep. I appreciated the family. There was so much comedic relief in this book. It ended up being like pretty campy and fun. And it was ultimately just really hopeful story about how people can change for the people that they love in good ways. And I don't know, I just loved it. It really touched me. I thought it was such a beautiful story, and I think it's very underrated, and I want more people to read it. Next, I want to talk about Dark Rise by C.S. Picot. This is a young adult fantasy book. It's the first in a series. I loved it. I thought it was so good. In this book, we're following our main character, Will. Will is 16 and he is on the run from the same people that killed his mother. He's been running from them for a while, but they have finally caught up to him. At the beginning of the book, he is actually captured by them. This starts off a chain of events of Will just being like drug into this world of magic and war, basically. Basically, the forces of dark and light are at war, and Will is caught in the middle. He's captured by the dark, escapes to the light, but he also is like, where's my place in all of this? And things aren't necessarily so simple as black and white, light and dark. Will has to figure out what's going on, what his place in this is. He's not sure he can trust anyone except for his friend. I think her name is Violet or Viola. I can't remember her name, but I think it's Violet. Honestly, their relationship is one of the best parts of the book because they become just like ride or die friends, and they will do anything for each other, and they're like the only people either of them can trust. And I really enjoyed seeing their friendship throughout this book, and I do think that this is going to develop into an MLM romance like further on down the road. And I'm so interested in the character that is the love interest, potentially I think is the love interest. His interactions with Will are so just intense and like full of feelings and just craziness. This book I loved because it had so many twists and turns. I was not expecting anything to happen the way it happened. Like, it took me so by surprise, and I thought that was so fun in a fantasy book, and the world created was so cool. I never knew like who I was supposed to be rooting for, light or dark, which I really enjoyed. The writing was so good, the characters were so good, the chemistry was so good. Everything about this book was incredible. Like, it was so good, it blew me away. It really truly blew me away. Another book that blew me away was A Taste of Golden Iron by Alexandra Rowland. This is an MLM fantasy romance book that I read in a vlog recently, and I figured I was gonna love it, and I really did love it. I loved it so much. In this book, we're following our main character, Prince Kadu. Prince Kadu, at the beginning of this book, is involved in some kind of altercation. He has to reprove his loyalty to his country and his sister, even though he was kind of right the whole time, but that's beside the point. His bodyguard was also involved in this altercation, so at the beginning of the book, Kadu is assigned a new bodyguard in Evermer. Evermer is very no-nonsense, perfect bodyguard on paper, take no prisoners, like very straight and narrow, cut and dry kind of person. But together, Kadu and Evermer discover this dangerous conspiracy. They start investigating it in order to help prove Kadu's loyalty to his sister and to his country. They start investigating, they spend more time together. Kadu and Evermer start to break down each other's walls, start to realize that they are very attracted to one another and like each other, and they have a little romance. Loved this book. The romance in it was so painful. Like, the whole time I was just screaming at these two characters, like, get your heads out of your asses, figure it out, and be together because you're perfect for each other, very obviously. But this is a very a very slow burn. It's a slow burn, but I enjoy slow burns, so I was liking it. I also just in general loved this book like as a fantasy book. Alexandra Rowland put so much work and detail into this world and the story and these characters. Everything just like came to life and it was so beautiful. I found zero plot holes. Everything was so intricately woven together. It was so impressive. Like literally so impressive. I loved all of the politicking and just the like opulence of the world. I don't know, it was just so cool. I loved all of the characters, not only Kato and Evermere, but also Kato's sister, even though I wanted to shake her sometimes. She was honestly really stupid. And I also loved Malik? Is that his name? Malik, maybe? I can't remember his name. Oh my god. Anyway, the friend, the former bodyguard. At first, I was like, I hate this guy. He's so annoying. But by the end of the book, he was my favorite character. Tadek. His name is Tadek. I loved him so much. He was so funny. He provided like so much comedic relief into this like honestly very serious book. It was so needed and I loved him so much. I thought he was so fun. He's the best. I loved how he just like teased and needled Kato and Evermere, who are both very serious people. Like it was so funny and it brought so much levity to a lot of their scenes and I really loved him. I thought how everything worked out was really smart. I would like a sequel because I did think the ending was a little bit rushed, but I can forgive it because I loved everything else about this book. Next on my list is Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane. This was my favorite sapphic romance of the year, hands down. I loved this book so much. This is a sapphic contemporary rom-com with the second chance trope. In it, we're following childhood best friends Logan and Rosemary. Logan and Rosemary grew up together, were really close friends, and were starting to head towards something more, but then something happened. They stopped being friends. They swore off each other, now they hate each other. It's like many years later, maybe 15 years later, they're close to 30, I think. But they both work as teachers in their old high school, but they completely avoid each other. But they do share this connection in their mutual favorite English teacher, and their mutual favorite English teacher is unfortunately dying of cancer, and his dying wish is that Logan and Rosemary both drive him cross country, they're in Portland, I think, to his cabin in Maine to spend his last days there. They're like, I don't want to be in a car with this person for so long. This sounds horrible. But they both eventually agree because this English teacher is like a father figure to both of them. So they're like, fine, we'll do it. We'll suck it up for you. But of course, as they spend more time together, as they're forced into proximity to one another, they have to confront their past and maybe current lingering feelings for each other. And this is just such a lovely story of not only romance, but also grief, but also like hope and like living life to the fullest and having no regrets. And I really loved all of those messages and I thought they were done so well and so meaningfully. I really was sobbing reading this book. I was sobbing so hard. I read it in public too, and I was sobbing in public because it was just so touching and so beautiful, so lovely. And I just couldn't stop reading it. Like even though I was crying, I was like, I need to know what's gonna happen, so I'm gonna keep reading it and I'm just gonna keep crying, and it's okay. It's alright if people in public think I'm crazy. They will never see me again. They'll never see me again. Who cares? Going back to the romance, I really loved how it developed. It definitely was a slow burn romance, but it felt very natural as they go from hating one another to being like grudging acquaintances, having to work together during this road trip to help their teacher. They start to like reform a friendship and then eventually reform a romance, and the romance was just so beautiful and was built on a lot of like mutual trust and communication, which I really loved. And I always love seeing like a positive, healthy representations in books. And also this book has such like accurate and healthy representations of mental health, which I appreciate, and I think that is Alison Cochrane's honest to God biggest strength. Like she writes mental health like no one else. I feel so seen by her books always, and I love that about them. I really think this is another book that pretty much anyone can get something out of. I really loved it. I don't know, I just thought it was so good. Definitely one of my favorites of the year. Another favorite of the year was The Prospects by K.T. Hoffman. This was a debut book and it was like one of the most impressive debut books I've ever read. I loved it so much. So much so that it is my second favorite book of the year. This is a rivals to lovers romance set in minor league baseball, in which our main character Gene is the first openly trans player in professional baseball. Gene is such a sunshiny character. He is so lovely. Even though he's like sometimes not having a great time, he puts on this like sunshiny face and is so just nice and sweet to everyone around him and so like uplifting to be around. I loved him so much as a character, but his facade kind of cracks when this man named Luis is traded onto the team. One, Luis is traded into Jean's position. Jean has to give his position up, play something else. Jean's not a big fan of this. Also, Luis and Jean have history. They went to college together, used to be really close friends, and then had a falling out. And so Jean kind of hates Luis and really doesn't want him to be there. The position Jean is moved to, he has to work directly with Luis's position. I don't know anything about baseball. And so the coach is like, y'all need to figure your shit out and work together or else you're going to ruin everything for the entire team. So he starts making them room together during away games, and they start to have like additional practice sessions, outside practice together, and they eventually kind of address their shit, talk through it, start to form a friendship, fall into a romance, and it's just so adorable. One of my favorite parts about this book too is Luis has these dreams to play for the majors, as do like quite a few people playing minor league baseball. And Jean has always kind of felt like the fact that he made it into professional baseball as a trans player was like the best he could ever accomplish. And Luis helps him see like, dream bigger. Like, you can dream bigger. You can make it to the major leagues. You're so good. So I just loved that message of like, not letting anything stop you. It's good to be content and positive with where you're at, but like, don't be afraid to dream bigger. You know, like, I don't know. I just loved that message in this book, and I loved living in this book for the time I was reading it because it was just so strongly about queer joy. And like, I want to live in a world where trans baseball players can dream of the major leagues and make it to the major leagues. Like, that's fucking insane and fucking amazing, and that's the world I want to live in. And so I need more books like this to be written so that everyone can realize that this is the world we need to live in, you know? I don't know. Loved it. I thought it was so good. And I loved the romance between Luis and Jean. It was just so tender and precious. It was so cute. I loved it so much. I loved it. It was so good. Right. Did anyone guess my favorite book of the year? It's A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall. I fucking loved this book. I loved it. It was so good. This is another Regency historical romance. It's queer in that our main character is trans. So our main character of this book, her name is Viola. She was presumed dead at Waterloo, and so she took this opportunity to finally live as her authentic self. The only problem is, to live as her authentic self, she had to sacrifice like her money, her status, her position. Luckily, she didn't have to sacrifice her family, as she still lives with her brother and her brother's wife and works as like a lady's maid to her sister-in-law. Another thing she had to give up though was her friendship with this man named the Duke of Gracewood / Justin. He's called Gracewood throughout the book. Gracewood is racked with grief at losing Viola. He thinks she's dead, and so he has been grieving her for like the past 2 years. Eventually though, Viola's sister-in-law hears that he's not doing well, and so she convinces Viola to travel there, not only see how Gracewood's doing, but also see how Gracewood's sister is doing. She's the one that wrote. And so they go and check in on them, and Viola finds that Gracewood is not doing well. He is a totally different person. Grief has really destroyed him. And so she gets it in her head that it's her duty to help him out. But she also can't really reveal who she is. But as the two spend more time together, feelings that would have been impossible in the past and may still be impossible now begin to surface, and the two start to fall in love with each other. This presents a lot of problems because of who Viola is, but really Viola cannot deny these feelings that she's having, and so they have to figure out what the heck they're gonna do. Honestly, this book was the most beautiful goddamn romance I've ever read in my entire life. I loved it so dearly. I loved these characters so much. I was just rooting for them the entire book. I feel like this is so different from everything Alexis Hall writes. There are funny moments in this book, but this definitely takes a lot more serious of a tone than a lot of his other stuff. But I just thought it worked so well. It worked so well. It was so good. It was just so beautifully written. The characters were so realistically, accurately, painfully rendered. I loved them so much. The way they spoke to each other was just so beautiful. Like, I have no words. No romance could top this. It literally is just the best thing I've ever read in my life. I am so, so, so in love with this book. So in love with it. I probably think about it once a day. I think if I could only read one book over and over again for the rest of my life, it would probably be this one. And really, that's all you need to know about it. So there you go. As the light's going, those were my favorite books of 2024. I hope you enjoyed this video. I definitely enjoyed reading all of these books, and so hopefully if you haven't read them, you can add them to your TBR, read them as well. If you're interested in purchasing any of them, I have affiliate links as always in the description. If you purchase through my links, I earn a tiny commission at no extra cost to you. Just there if you want it, no pressure, no big if you don't want to click, it's okay. You can also follow me on all social media. Those links are in the description as well. If this is your first time here, if you're not already, I would appreciate you subscribing if you're interested in watching more videos. I post pretty much exclusively videos about queer books on this channel, so if that's something that interests you, I would love if you stuck around. You can also give this video a like, leave me a comment down below, let me know your favorite book of 2024, all free ways to help support the channel, and I really appreciate it. I do think that's all for me today, so thank you again so much for being here. I really appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.